Welcome to this special edition of Business Chronicles. I am Pelé Bergnihotri.
I am Sébastien Lavoine.
Today we have the pleasure of inviting Mr. Ryan Alas, Managing Director of Rogers Capital Tax,
and Shafinaz Ramghulam, Head of Tax Advisory at Rogers Capital Tax, for an in-depth interview about the tax landscape.
Welcome Ryan and Shafinaz to our special edition of Business Chronicles.
It's a pleasure to have you both today on our platform.
Thank you for having us.
It's always a pleasure to be here.
So let's start with Shafinaz. 2025 has brought a wave of tax reforms, transfer pricing documentation under Section 75, QDMTT, and the fair share contribution. Which of these have increased the tax burden and compliance requirements for businesses the most? And given the shift forward, higher taxes and tougher compliance, what should companies do to manage this risk?
Indeed, Sébastien, there has been many changes in the tax legislation during this year. As you have correctly mentioned, there has been the enhanced transfer pricing requirements. We have qualified domestic minimum top-up tax, and now the government has introduced the fair share contribution over the next few years, which is an additional surcharge on profitable local companies and high net worth individuals. Let's start with the fair share contribution. This one will not have major compliance obligations, but it will increase significantly the overall tax burden of those local companies. It is a temporary measure designed to ensure that those profitable companies, those high net worth individuals contribute more to public finances. However, we are expecting that there will be an impact in terms of investment, expansion, and employment over the next few years. So these companies which are impacted by the fair share contribution should ensure that they are taking this additional tax into consideration in their profitability projections, capital spends, etc. Now, on the other hand, we have transfer pricing requirements. This one will have, unfortunately, significant ongoing compliance requirements and burden on taxpayers. But to be fair, this measure is expected because many countries have already implemented transfer pricing regulations, so it is expected. And it is a wake-up call for companies to review their related party transactions, for example, their interest-free loans, and consequently, this will increase their tax burden as well. So companies will need to understand that there will be implications. They need to assess, do benchmarking, functional analysis, and start thinking about preparing robust transfer pricing documentation. And now we have to see what will happen in the transfer pricing regulations as well. Hopefully there will be sufficient safe harbor provisions to mitigate or alleviate some transfer pricing burden. And hopefully the MRA as well will need to build in capacity locally to be able to handle transfer pricing cases. Now, finally, QDMTT, the sore spot. So QDMTT is Mauritius' commitment to OECD Pillar 2 global minimum tax rules, and it ensures that multinational companies will have to pay a minimum effective tax rate of 15%, right, in Mauritius. So this measure definitely will have both significant compliance obligations and significant tax burden on those multinational companies. So QDMTT will have to come with sufficient tax incentives, tax credits, and substance-based income exclusions, carve-outs to cater for substance in Mauritius. We have to ensure that all of these come into play. Unfortunately, the QDMTT regulations are not here. We don't have sight of the QDMTT regulations. So it is very difficult for multinationals to predict what will be their exposure going forward. But we are hoping that those regulations will come in consultation with all the different stakeholders before coming into play. We have to remember that multinationals contribute to a lot in terms of tax revenue, FDI, employment in Mauritius. And also there are many countries such as India, China, who have not implemented QDMTT yet. So we have to be very careful when implementing QDMTT. We have to ensure that implementing QDMTT is not at the expense of our country's economic growth. So basically a summary of those three measures.
Thank you, Shafinaz.
Ryan, we've witnessed a fascinating year of case laws and evolving interpretations from both the ARC and the courts. Which development, in your view, has most influenced the tax narrative this year? And what does it signal about the tax dispute landscape, where the tax dispute landscape in Mauritius is heading?
Well, a very interesting question. But to be frank with you, it is difficult to choose one cases that has specifically changed the landscape. All the different cases has in some way reshaped the tax landscape in Mauritius. The Judicial Committee of the Privy Council delivered a judgment in the case of Dominique Gallia, and given it's the highest court of appeal, so I would start with this. In that case, the taxpayer lost his case before the ARC, lost its case before the Supreme Court as well. But the Judicial Committee reversed both decisions. It is a message to the taxpayers community that we have a strong tax legal framework, that even if they lose at the ARC, even if they lose at the Supreme Court, they still have recourse to the Judicial Committee. Yeah. If they believe that they are right, of course, on point of law. And this is reassuring also to investors, because there are not many other financial centers or jurisdictions which have a court of appeal which is in another jurisdiction. And to go into the specificity of the case, it highlighted that when someone enters into a business transaction, he doesn't need to make profit immediately. What is important is there an intention to make profit? That's what counts. So it doesn't matter if you don't make profit or not. It's the intention that counts. And this is in line, I think, with many case law in the UK as well. Second judgment that I would say that has been a fresh air for the financial services sector would be the LTO case. Yeah. And it was a case on partial exemption, where at the level of the ARC, it was ruled that a company should be involved in money lending business or deriving interest income as part of its core income generating activity in order to benefit from partial exemption. The Supreme Court overruled the ARC based on the clear wording of the law. And even if the law has changed in the meantime, but at least for previous cases, taxpayers know that they can rely on this judgment unless it is reversed by the Judicial Committee. So I don't know if the decision of the Judicial Committee in the LTO case will come in 2026 or 2027, but what I know is that there are a lot of tax cases at the level of the ARC which are waiting for this outcome. And I would say also the case of Mauritius Freeport, where the taxpayer won at the level of the ARC, but this was reversed by the Supreme Court. with all due respect to the judges of the Supreme Court who delivered this judgment, I really don't understand this. And fortunately, I understand that the taxpayer has appealed to the Judicial Committee of the Privy Council. And let's hope that the sooner we'll get an outcome on this case, which is a departure from long-standing practice as well by the MOA. This is a case where, for example, a company can claim annual allowance on capital expenditure, specific assets. The law says you have a maximum rate, you don't have a minimum rate. So a taxpayer could claim zero. What the decision of the Supreme Court says is that no, you should claim at least 1 rupee, which doesn't make sense. Yeah. And also, I would highlight a decision which it was not surprising, but which is very critical for the financial services industry. The Denis Sexton case. It is about the liability of directors in respect of tax due by companies. So personal liability of directors. In fact, in the Denis Sexton case, there was an application for judicial review of the decision of the MOE, Director General of the MOE, to try to seize the property, personal property of the directors, to settle the tax debt of the companies. The director first tried to negotiate with the MOE. After a few years, there was no outcome out of the negotiation. The director decided to have recourse to the director's own assets to be able to settle the liability of these companies. The taxpayer applied for judicial review on 2 grounds. First ground was that the director is not the principal officer of the company.
Yeah.
In that case. The second reason was that the former Director General of the MOE, in a meeting with the Association of Management Companies in Mauritius, mentioned that the MOE undertake not to have recourse to the personal assets of directors to enforce tax liability of global business companies. On the first ground, the application for leave was refused because it was too late. Because the director took 3 years to put the case to the Supreme Court, and as you know, in a judicial review case, at that time the maximum time was 3 months, and I think now it's 45 days. The second ground was based on the legitimate expectation that the director could rely on what the former Director General of the MOE said in that meeting. The Supreme Court in the recent case mentioned that the taxpayer could not rely on what the Director General said. This doesn't create a legitimate expectation for directors not to be assessed on tax due by in companies where they are directors. So this is a wrong signal to everyone who is a director of a global business company. Because as a director of a global business company, you are not a shareholder of the company, and you don't necessarily have control on the board. And it can mean that even if you do all you can to minimize the tax liability or to ensure that companies where your directors settle their tax debt, you can still be liable to the tax. So I think for me, we require the urgent intervention of the government to reassure all these directors that sits on the board of global business companies or over independent directors who sit on boards of companies where they have no control. Having said that, I still do not believe that in the directors like Denis Sexo should be viewed as a principal officer, because the MOA is relying on a private counsel case a few years ago. There's a Chinya case where in that case Mr. and Mrs. Chinya was the sole shareholders and directors of the company, which obviously mean that they had full control of the company. But unfortunately, in the Denis Sexon case, the case was entered too late to challenge whether a director of a global business company, without any shareholding in the company, having done everything in his power to ensure that the company pays its debts, or has relied on advice on it of a tax professional to believe that the amount of tax that should be paid have been paid, is ultimately personally liable. A message for directors, to all directors of global business companies, but also domestic companies as well in some cases, that as soon as you get a letter from the MOA which indicates that the MOA considers you as a principal officer, you should immediately challenge that decision. Because, as opposed to what many persons believe, the Denis Sexon case has not ruled on this, because leave for appeal in that case was only granted on the legitimate expectation issue. Yeah, I think I've been a bit long on that case, but I think there is a message to the government.
Yeah, it's
There
important.
is also a message to directors and other stakeholders. They should be very careful. Now the law provides for 45 days, or will soon provide for 45 days for a judicial review of that particular decision of the MOA. So they should take immediate action.
Thank you, Ryan and Shafinaz, for sharing your insights and perspectives. It has been a truly engaging and thought-provoking discussion.
Thank you.
Thank you. Wish you all a Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year.
And a Happy New Year.
Thank you. On this note, Rogers Capital Tax Team would like to wish you all a Merry Christmas.
And a Happy New Year 2026.
Salut, joyeuses fêtes à tous.
Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas. Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas.
Joyeux Noël.
Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas from our family to yours.
Feliz Navidad.
Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas.
Happy New Year.